Welcome to Doctor on Call with your host, DocGriffon. The doctor will be with you momentarily. Our guest this evening is novelist and two-time Eisner Award winner for writing, Mike Baron. Instructions for use. Apply a generous amount of Doctor on Call to wet hair. Gently massage into a rich conversational lather from scalp to ends. Rinse with warm water. Repeat listening if desired. DocGriffon. Paging DocGriffon. You're needed in the OR stat.
And thank you very much, Nurse Cadet. I'd like to welcome everybody tonight. Tonight is definitely going to be a good night. The case study that I've been presented with is someone who has had perhaps an obsessive fascination, not necessarily OCD, but writing for over 35 years. Now, we're going to get into the symptoms and what would cause something to happen like this to make a person afflicted for such a long time. We're going to get down to the bottom of it. And I think the only way to do that is just to introduce our guest. Welcome, if you would, please, Mr. Mike Baron.
Thanks, Doc.
And how are you doing this evening, sir?
Peachy keen.
Always good to hear. Now, of course, Mike has literally been in the comic book writing profession. He's also a published author outside of the funny books. And he has written almost literally for every single comic book company, every major one. And we're going to get down to this. And, well, I tell you what, the easiest way is just to start from the beginning. What brought your fascination to writing? How young were you?
I was 12 years old. I wanted to be a writer when I picked up a paperback book in a local cigar store. It was 35 cents. I walked outside. I felt a frisson of pleasure because I knew it was going to be a good book. And I suddenly realized, well, this guy's not writing these for his health. He's getting paid for it. And that's what I want to do. I wish I'd gotten serious about it much sooner than I did. But I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time in regards to comic books. I went to the University of Wisconsin, and after I graduated, I moved to Boston because I heard there were newspapers there who would hire anybody who could write. And this turned out to be true. But my first job out of college was smoking marijuana for the government. I answered an ad in the real paper from Cambridge, Massachusetts, looking for applicants who would live on a hospital ward for a month, smoke government dope every day, and take tests. So I did that. And when I got out, I wrote it up, and that's how I broke into journalism.
Well, now I do want to slow you down for just a minute because I'm always curious about the influences. Do you remember what that book was?
Absolutely. It was The Deep Blue Goodbye by John D. MacDonald. And John D. MacDonald is the reason I'm writing today. He's probably my biggest influence and someone I have read over and over again over the years. I'm speaking specifically of his Travis McGee series. Each one has a color in the title, like The Deep Blue Goodbye, The Quick Red Fox, A Tan and Sandy Silence. They're all brilliant. No modern writer put his finger on the pulse of evil better than MacDonald, and I can't recommend his books too highly.
And did that basically focus you on the style of writing that you wanted to do, or was it one of those page turners that just opened up the possibility of the written word?
A little bit of both. I thought right after college that I would write a paperback novel and make a few quick bucks. So I sat down and I started to wing it. Well, it took me 30 years to learn how to write a novel, but I'm a slow learner. And had I studied it more carefully when I went to university and focused on my writing, I'd be a lot further ahead than I was for most of my life. But right now, I feel that I've caught up with myself, and I'm right where I want to be. About 10 years ago, I returned to trying to write a novel after a very difficult period in my life, and suddenly I had it, and I knew I had it, and I'm more excited about my writing today than I ever have been before. I get up and I look forward to writing because I know what I'm going to write.
And I think that is well, it'll follow up later, but yeah, a lot of people believe that they can write. A lot of people believe, oh, hey, writing's an easy job. Let's just go ahead and do it. Only thing you need is a pen and paper, and that's simply not true.
Well, it is. It's not true, because I know a lot of really good writers that are barely scraping by. And I know 10 times as many dilettantes who have published their own novels that are unreadable. I think I heard somewhere that there are like 4 million new novels a year in the United States. But let's say that's ridiculous. Let's cut it down by 90%. Say there's only 400,000 new novels a year in the United States. Well, that's still quite a mob scene. And the question is, how do you break out from that mob? How do you attract attention? And that presupposes that the writing is gripping. My philosophy in writing has always been to grab the reader by the throat and drag him into the narrative so that he forgets everything else. And that's what I'm trying to do. But even if you do, I mean, I'm on little tiny publishers with no budget, so I have to promote myself. I'm still figuring that out.
Well, that's always the pitfalls. When I started off writing, it was late 80s, and I earned enough rejection notices to literally wallpaper an entire room.
Did you do that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I tacked them all up on one empty wall.
Good enough.
And once that wall filled, it was too depressing. But it was one of those things that helped me build a thicker skin.
Yeah,
and
good.
I mean, because one thing, you can be an awesome writer, but if you have no passion to it.
Well, you're not going to be an awesome writer if you have no passion.
Well, I mean, my three things that I say in every show: you have to flex your pec, which is you have to have passion, you have to make the effort, and you've got to be committed to seeing it all the way through. If you don't have those three things, you're never going to be personally successful. I know a lot of money never really flows in hand over fist. There's only a few that really actually make a lot of bucks, but if you've got those three, you can have fulfillment.
Yeah.
And I believe that's possible and probable. And I'm sorry, I have to do this because I've passed out the link, but since I don't know the person here, we hadn't invited him in.
Is it Ian Fisher? Let him in.
Well, if Ian's going to let in, he's got to turn off his camera.
Oh, tell Ian that. Ian, are you listening?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Okay.
Hold on. I think my camera's off. Now it's off.
No, your camera's off. Okay.
Is it off?
Yeah, I'm a little taken aback because I don't know who this person is.
Oh, Ian's an old friend of mine. He's a movie director. He did Rude Dude. He sounds like God, doesn't he? He sounds like God. But he's cool. I invited him.
If God had an echo.
Yeah.
Well, technically, I guess he does. So now you were talking about you went to the University of Wisconsin, correct?
Yeah.
Now, what was your field of study?
Political science. I'm so glad you asked.
A poli-sci major, huh?
Yeah.
Now, because I do have to ask this, I ask it of everyone who ever does political science. where did you hope to go after graduation with it?
Where, I did go for an interview with the State Department, but I wasn't serious. I was a callow young man. I didn't know what I really wanted to do. And it just took me a long time to find myself. But I knew I wanted to write. And that's why I moved to Boston. It was kind of a leap of faith.
And I know being far away from home to me gave me a lot of time to be creative. But did that have, being a stranger in a strange land, did that have a positive effect on your writing?
Well, yes, it did, because working for newspaper, I had to make the deadline. It was a pretty cushy job. I was music editor for the Phoenix, and my job was to go out night after night and listen to bands and interview musicians, which I loved to do anyway. But I was honing my craft. I did other types of stories. And your writing had to be a certain level or they wouldn't pay you. But as far as fiction, the only help it gave me in fiction was the experience I gathered, which I was able to use many years later.
Well, now a lot of writers say that you have to take a piece of your learned experience, even if it is fiction, and make it a part of what you write to make it believable. Do you follow along those lines at all?
Well, they say write what you know, and every writer knows himself. And I think that we all extrapolate our worldview into our fiction to a certain extent.
Well, but I think that would be hard to put in, let's say, a character who's been given cosmic powers but has to murder a lot of people.
Well, it's just an exercise of the imagination. That's what the writer does. He exercises his imagination. At some point, you have to bust out of yourself and imagine every point of view in whatever you're trying to write. If that includes an Eskimo woman, you got to get inside her head. Nat Turner, William Styron had to get inside the head of a black slave. And so it's not far of a stretch to get inside the head of a cosmic executioner, because we're dealing with fiction. And the first rule of fiction is that it's the writer's job to entertain. And I know how to entertain because I understand story structure and what makes for gripping fiction. So I don't really have to know of the exact existence of some planet in another galaxy. I can make that up. All I have to do is be consistent and be credible. The point is to entertain, not to depict the universe in realistic manner. I mean, up to a point. I mean, we're talking about science fiction here, and then science fiction is the extrapolation of ideas, the extrapolation of trends into an entertaining story. And the key word there is entertaining, because if you don't entertain, nobody's going to read your book.
Yeah, because everyone says that there's only 7-story archetypes, and a lot of people buck up against that, and everything's always going to be man versus something, and it's usually one of those 7 things. There's subgenres to them, but I can see 3 people write the same story, have the same elements, but if they're good enough writers, they make it unique. They individualize it.
Yeah.
Did you have problems when you were reporting in real life nonfiction? The want to try to do creative fiction flourish on it?
Oh no, I never confused the two. I mean, I know what journalism requires and I know what fiction requires, but the whole time I was writing journalism, I was also trying to write fiction, and I would sit down with the intent of writing a novel, and I would just wing it. I just start and see where it leads. And I was not at that stage. I was not up to it. And there are very few people who can do it. There are very few novelists who write without an outline. Elmore Leonard is one of them.
Well, I certainly enjoy his. I do like Rum Punch. Now you're in Boston. You're writing nonfiction. Kind of fill in the blanks for us about how you had the availability to, slide over. Was comics your first real foray into published fiction?
No, I published a few short stories there. I just got lucky with the comics, but I was always on, because magazines and newspapers are omnivorous.
Whoop, I think we lost you.
Am I back?
Yes.
All right, all right. Newspapers and magazines are omnivorous beasts that have to be fed constantly. So if you have half a brain, you can sit down and put together 5 story ideas and send them in, and they'll take one. They'll always take one if they're any good. And that's what I did. I did that all the time. I did that with all sorts of magazines. I heard that there was a basement at Harvard underneath some science lab where they held the cadavers and the bones and the monsters. So I went down there and I did a story about it and appeared in the Boston Globe. And the next day, Harvard started calling me to demand explanations. I didn't take the calls. We only had rotary phones back in those days, but they were outraged because it was it was a funny story. It was a fun story, but it did not perhaps treat Harvard with the dignity with which they felt they were entitled.
Well, if you're stashing bodies, then it's all fair game at that point.
That's right. That's right.
Now, you mentioned luck getting into comic books. So was it something that you had previously written that somebody saw? What's the story? How did you break in?
Well, I was working at an insurance company when I met Steve Rude. And we got together, and he wanted to do comics, couldn't write. I wanted to do comics, we couldn't draw. So I said, well, let's try working together. So we wrote up some stuff. And then we heard that these local guys, which was Capital City Distribution, were interested in publishing. So we showed them what we had. And Milt said, nah, we can't print that. Give us a costume superhero. So I went home and I brainstormed. I said, what would be dramatic? Well, what if the guy killed somebody every time he showed up? That would be dramatic. So I went from there and created this whole mythos about a cosmic executioner, a reluctant executioner who's only acting out what he sees in his dreams to prevent his own self-destruction at the whim of an insane alien.
Merc. And I think it's kind of amazing because that anchored Capital. I think they did 6 issues in black and white first.
There were 3 black and white issues and then 4 color issues before they sold it to First.
And I at the time was actually managing a comic book shop, and our distributor, and we can get into the Capital Diamond thing a little bit later, because I think a lot of people really don't know that story. But our distributor, the people that we bought books from, it was Capital Comics. So we got the chance to go up because it was we were local. Their distribution hub was in Columbus, so it was a 45-minute drive for us, and we got to go up, and I saw issues of Nexus and I saw issues of Badger, and I'm like, why aren't we picking these up? Why didn't you guys feature these in the books? And it's like, well, this is something that we're kind of doing, and we're going to ease into it. And I'm like, well, okay, then if you're going to ease into it, give me 3 copies of each. I think there were only 2 issues of Badger out at the time. And then I don't remember how many there were of Nexus, but we bought them. We brought them back. We put them up on the display, and we were out.
Great.
We had people basically going, where did this come from? We need to have more. Do you have any by any of these artists or writers? And it's like, no. No, we don't. This is it so far. So you got to enjoy it while you have it. And I'm just wondering about the creative process, because from any of the interviews that I've seen and what I've read from Root himself is that this was definitely your baby, but visually he had freedom to do what he wanted. How did that partnership work?
Well, he was on page. He wasn't trying to impose his vision on me. He faithfully executed what I wrote, and often brought a lot more to it than I had imagined. He created all these characters in the background, and because they kept reappearing, I would bring them forward and give them personalities, and thus they joined this ever expanding cast.
And well, I mean, as far as that part, he was visually fleshing out. So technically, he was also inspiring to move your writing along. Not necessarily the plot line ran through, but the decoration, the window dressing, kind of changed because of the inspiration from his art.
A plot line runs through it. Well, yeah. He would inspire me with things that he drew, and so I'd focus on that character, and it would take the story in a different direction.
Well, and if we're going to jump into the drawing methods, there's usually two ways that are generally accepted or usually pointed out, and that's like the Julius Schwartz method, where it's, I wrote this, you just basically fill the page. Whereas the Marvel method is, well, I've got an idea, this is what happens in the book, you draw it, and then I will fill in the words later. Now it seems it seems a lot like you went Julius Schwartz.
Well, that was only possible because we were on the same page.
Understand that.
But I believe in writing full script. The writer has to lead.
Well, even the best writers out there too. The quickest example that comes to mind is Alan Moore. I've seen one of his scripts, and the thing is thick.
Yeah.
Shall we say? I would say any artist would be challenged to actually.
I know, because I have friends who have worked with that style, and they don't like it. And I think you're getting around to the fact that I used to draw each page out by hand. So you got one page of my pictographs equals one page of comic. Everybody loved it because you could see at a glance how it worked. And my art is just good enough to get the idea across. And in fact, dude called me yesterday and asked me to return to that method of writing. Huh. I don't know I haven't done it in a long time, but I told him I'd give it a shot.
Yeah, no, I guess I telegraphed that question a little bit too much, huh?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's fascinating. I mean, some of the best directors in Hollywood will go through and personally thumbnail their scripts, like Scorsese and Ridley Scott. And sometimes they'll make a bad movie, but by God, it's shot the way that they want it. Now, was there ever any time that in the early days when Rude or Butler would turn in something that you weren't completely expecting, and that made you change up the story a little bit?
Oh, probably, but there's nothing really noteworthy back there. The stories pretty much came out the way I intended.
And I must say at this point that Jeff Butler had some very complimentary things to say about you and working with you. As a matter of fact, he said that he lamented the fact that he didn't get to draw more of Badger, but there was another job opportunity that he had to take with TSR, so that limited his availability to be able to draw. And I'm sure you never begrudged him the ability to get a bigger paycheck too.
Of course not.
And let's talk a little bit about this, because you can't think of Nexus without thinking of yourself and Rude.
Yeah.
Whereas the next book that you did, which was The Badger, by the way, I do recommend, because of the fact that both Nexus and Badger are made up in compendiums and trade paperbacks. So if you don't want to run around trying to collect, then just simply go buy the trade paperback. Those are available everywhere.
I'd also like to point out that my friend Ian Fisher, who's listening to this program right now, has directed a documentary about Steve called Rude Dude, which I encourage you to watch.
Well, if Ian wants to get up into the chat on the watch page, I will wrench him, and he can actually throw any link out that he wants. So we can get people drawn to that too.
Yeah, Ian, do that.
But does it present some type of difficulty when you lose an anchor like Butler to continue on with the story using different artists?
Well, I would love to work with Jeffrey again on anything, and he knows that. And we've talked about it over the years. But the fact is that there are 100 brilliant artists out there with whom I'd love to work. 100 brilliant artists. I'm working with one now. His name is Jordi Armengol. I don't know if you've seen any of the pages I've posted from Off-Worlder, which I'm doing with him, but this guy will blow your mind. He's like Barry Smith at the height of his powers.
Wow, now that's a high compliment.
Are you on Facebook with me?
I do not know if I am.
Are you on Facebook?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. It's with my IRL, but
what's the IRL? What's your Facebook handle? All right,
I can't
never mind.
That doxes me, but I will send it to you.
All right.
I'll email it over to you. But
okay.
So do you find that when you're writing a book and you switch artists, do you find that you're writing, I don't want to use the word evolve, but do you find it changing kind of sometimes to be able to fit the style of the artist?
Oh yeah, whenever I'm about to collaborate with someone, I say, well, what do you like to draw?
Okay. And so since we're at the bottom of the hour, let's do some fast and friendly shilling here. If you do want to find out more about Mike Baron and his works, and they are continuing works, I expect to see a whole lot more out of him. You can go to his official website. That's linked down below. He also has a Twitter. And we've gone ahead and listed his authorship. These are basically written books. These aren't comics. These are actual readables. And we have all those links listed down to Amazon. So if you've got a hankering, then I would certainly suggest checking out those links. Because, you're probably not getting a dime off the trade paperback. So, make the man some money. And
heed my grovels, read my novels.
And actually, that's one of the things that I want to dig into a little bit later. Switching from a physical visual genre, going into the theater of the mind. But you got Nexus under your belt. You've got Badger under your belt. Do the companies come knocking, or do you pursue them as far as the major publications? You said it was luck that started you off on the road, but as far as getting the ability to write some high visibility titles, how did that come about?
Well, I was hot for about 15 minutes, and I wrote The Punisher and Flash and a few other titles. But I did fall out of the industry for a number of years through nobody's fault but my own. As I mentioned, I had a dark period in my life for about 10 years. And when I was crawling out of that, it was when I finally figured out how to write a novel. And now I'm writing better than I ever have before. But I have been unable to obtain any writing gigs from the big two where I used to work. I have sent them pitch after pitch over the years, and I have never received a reply. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I ran into C.B. Sobalski in Connecticut, and I said, "C.B., I'm Mike Barron. I used to write Punisher. I'd like to pitch you on some new stories." He said, Mike, I'd love to hear from you." And he gave me his card. So I wrote him 3 times, and I never received a reply. And this is one of the reasons that so many comic creators today are going outside the system to crowdfund their own copies, their own projects. And in many cases, these projects are superior to what the big two are offering.
Well, and let's jump into this, because I know that you're planning to go the same route as Richard C. Myers doing his Jawbreakers thing. There's a ton of other very talented artists and writers that have struck out on their own. Do you think in the current atmosphere of comics today, it's just, well, hell with all this, I'm just going to go ahead and do my own? Or is the attraction, wait a minute, I can make this on my own and it's going to be mine and nobody else has the right to it. So, this is the way that I'm going to strike out.
Well, that's all very well and good, but at any comic convention, you'll find dozens of tables rented by hopeful young people and not so young people who have no business being there, in that their product is simply not professional quality or not very entertaining. So if you're going to jump out, you have to make sure that you have a superior product. As I said, you've got to grab readers by the throat. And that means if it's a comic, you start interesting. You don't open the comic and the first thing you see is a page of text bringing you up to speed. And if it is a comic, the art has to grab you too. Now, a comic has been sold with terrible stories and great art. And a few comics have been sold with great stories and terrible art. But the best is to have great stories and great art. And that's what every creator should aim for.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing thing that, I mean, to plug down at the bottom, I have links to other channels that I like to watch, and quite a few of them are excellent artists. They do a great job in what they do. They're all stylized. They have their own way of drawing. There's so much of a vast pool of talent out there, and I really have trouble with comics nowadays because the story and the art don't match the excitement of comic books. Now, personally, for me, I think comic books, are the tomes of the modern mythos. They are our, Greek hero stories. And
they can be.
And I mean, yeah, there are realistic ones, like Crumb doing American Splendor, which those are definitely fascinating. You can always get into the story because it is real. I mean, essentially, it's an autobiography with pictures.
Crumb excelled at that, and he also illustrated a number of Harvey Pekar stories.
Mm-hmm.
It was Harvey was American Splendor.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I did confuse.
Don't worry about it. We're all geeks here.
Yeah, but yeah, I think it's a lot harder to grab the imaginations nowadays. But on the reverse token, there are so many people out there who are geeks like us who just want those kind of stories that not only, take us off to faraway places, but are also, black hat versus white hat. The villain may throw a beating, but the hero always will win. Now, how did you get into your head that self-publishing was where you wanted to go?
Well, I really don't know what I'm doing. As I said, I have no idea how to promote myself, but we did kickstart Cue Ball, which has been picked up by Antarctic Press. But my wife, Ann, who knows how to organize these things, she ran the whole thing. Now I'm involved with Cautionary Comics. That Ben Henderson is the publisher, and that's the guy for whom I'm doing Offworlder. And Ben plans to crowdfund this comic. He has some outstanding talent lined up. I understand Chuck Dixon is writing for him as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, this Offworlder comic I'm writing is going to blow your mind. Not only is the script really good, this guy's art is just it's just going to blow your mind. And I've been posting a number of pages on my Facebook page, which is Michael A. Barron, in case anybody is interested.
You know what? I'm gonna have you keep talking, and I will try to fish that out so I can also put that in the links too.
All right. Well, while we're talking, I have a number of novels out, and you always say, well, what's your novel about? And when that question comes, you have to be ready. Well, I have a novel that's about Nazi biker zombies. Yes, you heard right, folks. Nazi biker zombies. Need I say more? No, but I will. It's an uptaking of the legend of, it's an upgrading of the legend of Sleepy Hollow with bikers. And Ian Fisher, my friend, has written a film script, and we're trying to find a producer for this. It would be a low-budget horror film. The script is highly original and very entertaining, and so's the idea.
Actually, I always have loved the everything old is new again.
Yeah.
You can always put it doesn't necessarily have to be a modern day twist, but I've always looked at stories and the 7 archetypes like a diamond, because every facet has a different color to it, and a different sheen, different texture, and there is nothing saying, especially to new and budding writers, that you can't take a story that's already been done and put your spin on it.
No, of course you can. My 3 first rules of writing are, number 1, your job is to entertain, and number 2, show don't tell, and number 3 is be original. And that doesn't mean that you can't redo Romeo and Juliet, because it's been done dozens of times in various time periods, and it usually works because it's Shakespeare and he knew what he was doing. And it's hard to come up with original concepts. And even when you do, an idea by itself is of no use to people unless it gets a treatment that grabs you by the throat.
Well, I can certainly agree with that. And I'm sorry, I'm a bit distracted. Putting in the Facebook link too. So down in the description, you'll be able to take a look at what we're talking about as well. And yeah, and I run into a lot of writers. I used to go to writing symposiums, and they drove me insane, because literally 80% of the people were saying, well, I've got this story idea. Okay, how much have you written? Well, I haven't written anything yet.
Yeah. Why don't you write it and we'll split the profits?
Yeah, it has to fall upon don't think it be it, because you could have the greatest story in the world in your head, but that means nothing until you get it down on paper.
Yeah.
And you have somebody take a read. Like I mentor some people because I've gotten kind of a name in horror on the interwebs, and they'll say, well, I've got this story idea, and I'm like, well, don't tell me what it is. Write it and send it to me and let me read it. So then I'll be able to give you a real full-fledged critique.
Sure.
Because just having an idea, I have no bloody idea where you're going with it. I don't know what you're doing.
That's why I believe in outlines.
I do outlines sometimes, but they're so janky. You know, it's just like here's a 20-pager that I want to write. Here are the points that I want to hit somewhere in the story, and then I just go from there. I'm very free form, but even my wife, who does my editing, will always say, you know, no, I'm not gonna. Don't tell me what the plot is. Don't tell me some scene in the story. Write it and hand it over. I want to see the finished product.
Mm-hmm.
And I stress that with a lot of writers, even if it turns out to be shit, at least you completed it. You have a complete work now where you can go back and, you know, you can paint the walls, you can shore back up your stair steps. You know, you can hang new curtains, but too many of them just have an idea and they want people to flesh it out for them. And it's like, well, no, because your creativity is what started it. It's what motivates it. So, you know, go for it. I'm sorry. I'm diatribing here, but I mean, is there anything about that you would agree with?
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Here's what I like in an outline. I work up a very detailed outline that covers most of the story arc, and I design that outline to be just as entertaining as the story itself.
Yeah, because I mean, you're always looking forward to the journey, but it's definitely the sights that you see on the way to the finish line that can push a story over the top or just crush it out. I see a lot of people nowadays in the current community, especially working for the big two, that it's more message than it is entertainment. Do you think currently in the state of comics right now, are they breaking your rules as you see it?
Oh yeah, that's why they're not selling any comics, is because they're not entertaining. They're lecturing and they're virtue signaling. And people aren't stupid. They don't like to be lectured and told that they're racist, sexist, homophobic, or whatever. So they're not buying those comics.
And I mean, they were comic books from the beginning were fantasy releases.
Well, yes, but they were, and many writers who say comics have always been about social justice are half right. Comics have always been about justice. But once you drag that social justice in, then you're talking identity politics and you're overlooking the individual. You're not judging each person on his, her, or its merits. And that's what I believe in as an unreconstructed conservative, that we have to judge people as individuals and not as members of tribes.
Because people who do things for good, and I think this may have been a wave that was started by Alan Moore, that there has to be an underlying reason why they're doing it. And nowadays people are having a hard time accepting the fact that there are heroes and there are regular people out there that do good just for the sake of doing good.
Well, that's all grist for the mill. But as I said, the number one rule is to entertain. That's the writer's job. It's to entertain.
Well, and I'm sure you're completely aware of comics history. I got into a discussion with someone who said comic books have always been political. I'm like, no, they haven't. There are certain times where they've become jingoistic or propagandist or a bit social justice-y. But that's maybe about 20% of the life of comics as they started. I mean, of course, we had, you know, Captain America punching Hitler. We had Green Lantern and Green Arrow finding Speedy shooting heroin. These things are going to come up. These things are going to happen. But once again, look at what happened with the comic book industry when they got together for the whole 9/11 thing. It wasn't a preachy thing about, you know, let's go get this person or let's go get that person. I don't know if you read the Spider-Man one, but
No.
that was literally amazing because Spider-Man was just looking at the wreckage going, there was nothing I could have done about this. You know, he's trying to pull people from the wreckage and he's feeling like a normal human being, like he's completely useless, like he could have done more. Now, that's something that's not really social justice-y, but it is human.
Yeah.
And it is entertaining. It makes that connection. Do you find sometimes, especially with the characters that you didn't create, do you find any difficulty with finding a connection?
No.
Or is it just you have to, you know, erase the board and try to jump in their skin?
I don't have a problem. I'm prepared to imagine whatever character they hand me. But as always, I would prefer to do my own characters.
Oh, of course. Now, as far as doing, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, journeyman writing, you've literally written for, I think, every comic book company with the exception, I think, of Image.
Hardly. I have written for Image.
Oh, you have?
Oh, yeah. I put out several projects with Image. And I may again, but there are some companies for whom I have not written.
I know you did Marvel, you did DC, you did First, now IDW with Star Wars.
Well, no, I did some Badger through IDW.
Oh, okay. Who did you do the Star Wars ones with?
Dark Horse.
Oh, Dark Horse. Okay. So was Mike a good guy to work for?
Mike is a prince. He returned copyright and trademark to Nexus to Steve Rude and me, an unprecedented act in the comic industry that has never been repeated.
Well, I've met him a couple times, and yeah, I can say he's definitely a straight up fellow, especially with the fans.
He's straight way up.
Yeah. And yeah, being around during the Dark Horse boom, it was really hard to find in that company a book that you didn't like. I think that, and honestly, I really thought that Dark Horse was going to be number 3 and maybe even number 2, just by the power of their books. Like you were saying, it's one of those things where, you know, you can have a, you know, crappy art, but a great writer. Sometimes that goes over. I thought all their books were all well written, and I thought they were all well drawn and uniquely stylized in some cases. Now, do you think that was more detrimental to their success or their popularity?
Well, I disagree with you. I think they have a very high quality line, but I have a number of Dark Horse books now. Of course, you may be talking about what happened 30 years ago, and I would have to go back and look over their whole line. But they were like a lot of publishers. They had some good stuff, they had some bad stuff, and they had some stuff in the middle. I think one thing that you can say about Dark Horse is they've always featured unusual and exciting artists. And they've published a lot of books from artists who couldn't get published elsewhere, like Richard Corbin or Jeff Darrow. And I was just looking at their books last night. I mean, Jeff Darrow book it's insane, the detail that he puts into it, but there's no story whatsoever. I mean, it's amusing, and it kind of tracks from panel to panel, but it's all about the visuals.
Well, do you take any inspiration now that you're going out on your own to do your own comics? Do you take any inspiration, like say from people like Dave Stevens?
I don't know if I take any inspiration from Dave.
I mean, for the Cerebus seemed to run a very long time.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was mostly under his press.
No. You're thinking of Dave Sim.
Sorry, Dave Sims. I apologize. Dave Stevens was the Betty Page artist.
Yeah, Rocketeer.
The one who did Rocketeer. Yeah.
Dave Sim is now writing for All Caps Comics, which is Ethan Van Sciver's new imprint.
Yeah. Now Ethan's been kind of making his rounds in the neighborhood around this side of YouTube.
Yeah,
he makes frequent appearances all over the place, and he's very interesting guy to listen to.
Yeah,
he'll more likely want to talk more about Star Wars than comic books, but yeah, we still know that he does it. Also, Richard C. Meyer is running around with his Diversity in Comics channel. As far as these guys go, I mean, they're compared to your track record and your history, they seem to be, more fledgling than anything else.
Well, they're younger.
Yeah.
That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah. Do you see any differences from when you broke in originally and got into the comic books industry, and how it's changed? And if so, has it changed for the better or worse? Now, we talked about fan side, but what about for creator side?
Well, it's a mixed bag. Right now, the comic industry, like the publishing industry in general, is in free fall. They don't know whether to shit or go blind. Sales on the big two are way down for a whole bunch of reasons. And one reason that doesn't get discussed much is video games. Frankly, a $4 or $5 comic cannot compete to a well-done modern video game in terms of bang for your buck. And I can see why we're raising a whole generation now that doesn't read comics, because they'd rather play video games, and who can blame them? The video games are often more realistic and exciting than the comics. And that's not to say that they're War and Peace or anything like that, but while I don't play, I've looked over the shoulder of some of my friends playing, and I see the attraction. Also, the distribution system, which has never run smoothly, is falling apart again, because there are comic stores, which kind of saved the day 30 years ago by springing up and becoming a destination where you could buy all your comics. They're falling now too. Rents are rising. They can't make the rent. They're not doing enough business. They're having real trouble. Then you got your online comics. I don't get it. I like something I can hold in my hand, but I understand that a lot of people are just getting their Comixology comics and looking at them on their iPhone while driving through Canyon Country or something. I don't get that either. I like something I can hold in my hand. But because of the collapse of the comic stores, the only thing that's really growing are graphic novels. And the reason graphic novels are growing is because they can get them into bookstores.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that's growing are these crowdfunders. Ethan Van Sciver raised over $500,000 for his Cyber Frog title. And that's how he's financing All Caps Comics. And I know of other creators who have raised phenomenal amounts. And there are many reasons for this. But one reason is they're offering an exciting product that people want to see. And another reason is people are disgusted with the traditional titles.
Yeah. Somebody once told me that there's only so many stories that can be told about a certain person. I don't believe that that's true. I mean, you may have to reboot and retell an origin, but you take to heart what the canon was, unless you're doing a reboot, and you sit back as a writer and go, well, what hasn't been done, or what can I do, or wait, I think I've got a better take on this story that they did a long time ago.
Well, I think there are infinite number of stories on any character. How many Batman stories have there been? There must be over 1,000 by now. People will continue to come up with fresh Batman stories.
Yeah, because some people are trying to blame that the slump on the fact that, well, you know, comic books, they've been around way too long. They're past their time. And if you have somebody who's actually passionate about a character, and there were many characters in the 90s that were just floundering, and people like Peter David said, well, let me take over the Hulk. I've got an idea for it. And he did what, like a 2 or 3 year run. And the stuff that he was doing was incredibly fresh. It was stuff that people didn't think about or didn't acknowledge. How McFarlane changed about Spider-Man around the same time. There are infinite possibilities. It's just, do we have, or do you think that we have people in place right now in the comics industry who are able to follow that mantra and be able to push forward and take that kind of responsibility for what's become archetypal characters?
Sure.
You one-worded me. Oh,
well, that's because there's so much talent waiting to break in at any time that you'll never be at a loss for people who can write the characters well, which puzzles me why they hire writers who obviously can't write. But that's neither here nor there. I am more interested in telling my own stories about my own characters than writing Batman or Punisher, although I love Punisher.
Well, and we're getting close to the top of the hour, so just to remind the chat, please do have your questions loaded and ready in the chat, so
yeah, let's
we
go
can
to the questions.
ask them to Mike.
Yeah, I'm an old man. I go to bed early.
So we'll definitely get those done. But while they're loading questions into the chat, let's talk a bit about your current endeavors in novelization.
All right. I posted Biker. Biker's the first in the Bad Road Rising series. It features a former motorcycle hoodlum who went to prison and found God and came out determined to turn his life around. His name is Josh Pratt. And the reason his name is Josh Pratt is I was riding my bike into town one day and I saw a roadside memorial to a young cyclist who had died there, and his name was Josh Pratt. This is my homage to John D. MacDonald and Travis McGee, although I bring my own experience to it, so it's very fresh. Josh Pratt is headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin. A lot of the stories feature motorcycle operators, some gangs. It's not Sons of Anarchy. I wrote it before Sons of Anarchy appeared. But if you like Sons of Anarchy, you'll like the Bad Road Rising series. I have 4 out so far, and there will be 6 by the end of the year. Biker introduces Josh Pratt. Sons of Privilege is about the smiley face killings. That's the second one. The third novel, Not Fade Away, is about a woman who hires Josh to prove that she's the owner of a very famous song that an insurance company is using as a jingle. Number 4 is Sons of Bitches. It's about a woman who puts out her own Muhammad comic and has to hire Josh to protect her. Number 5 is Buffalo Hump. It's about a charismatic Indian blues musician who opens up a casino in South Dakota, and people were trying to kill him. And number 6 is Bloodline, and it's about a motorcycle gang made up entirely of ex-military men and how they get mixed up with some remnants of the Third Reich in Paraguay.
Wow. That's definitely going all over the place. I love what seems to be normal people in imaginative settings and watching how they work.
Well, these all fall under the crime, suspense, thriller rubric. I hope they are thrilling. But I know how to grab readers by the throat. It took me a long time to learn, uh, and so I try to make books that you cannot put down.
So do you take any inspiration from writers like Raymond Chandler or James Elroy or Dashiell Hammett?
I do, in fact. Those guys were all masters of noir. James Elroy is still a master of noir. However, more Chandler and Hammett, whose narratives are more reader friendly. Elroy has become so mannered in his prose. I don't know if you've read any of his books in the last 10 years, but they're like being up against the wall while somebody's shooting a machine gun at you. Have you read any of them?
Not in the past 10 years. I have not.
Well, you know that he writes in very short clipped sentences, one after another after another. I walked in the door. I put my gun on the table. I sat down. I looked out the window. I saw a man murdering a woman. I got up. I picked up. It's like that. But but I don't want to turn people off of Elroy because he's unique. He's an original, and a couple of novels I would recommend without hesitation, including The Big Nowhere and L.A. Confidential, which was made into a very good movie.
Well, I thought it was okay.
All right.
It didn't inspire me to read the book, and the book is better.
Yeah, the book is better. But the movie was good.
But now, you had talked about also the possibility of you getting into celluloid, perhaps with animation doing Nexus.
Well, I haven't talked about it. That's Dude's dream. He's been working on that for years. And in fact, we have an outline for a story, which he did, and he sent me. And we're sounding it out. But right now, the main Nexus activities at Dark Horse, where they're going to publish a raft of new material.
Man, that's definitely exciting to, Nexus fans who've been following it for literally decades. As far as, I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and do this real quick. Now, the books that have been mentioned, they're linked down there in the chat description. So buy them now. You can buy multiple copies too. If you want to see more about Mike, he does have an official website. Also the Twitter and Facebooks, where you can also see some additional art that's going on. But let's talk about this, because your future seems to be in independent publishing. If somebody came up to you with an offer on the table from DC or from Marvel, and they said, listen, whatever character you want to write, Mike, would you bite for something that you haven't done, or would you revisit a character that you have?
If it were Marvel, I'd like to do more Punisher, but I'd also like to do Master of Kung Fu, because there's Kung Fu in the title, but there's no Kung Fu in the book.
Oh, I honestly would love, and I've reached out to Paul Gulacy, because as far as it goes, I don't think anybody's ever done a Bruce Lee better than him. And for those who haven't actually read Master of Kung Fu, Shang-Chi most of the time looks like Bruce Lee, and they did a series, I think it was rounding up to issue 50, where they were storming Fu Manchu's castle. And I forgot who the writer was, but he had brilliantly split up the books to the 4 books leading up to the 50th, went with the characters that were on the main characters from Master of Kung Fu. They were on little solo efforts to infiltrate the castle in different directions.
Yeah, I
So
believe
he
that
was-
was Doug Minch.
Oh, yeah, Doug. Is it Mensch? I always thought it was Monak.
No.
Okay. Well, I'm trusting you because you're the professional.
I'm very professional about his name.
But there's a lot of great writers that I would love to see Marvel and DC turn to and say, hey guys, you know, we're floundering. We're selling 10,000 copies of a book that used to sell 80,000, you know, 10 years ago. I think there's a lot of experience. There's a lot of pro that's being overlooked. Now, if let's say you became editor-in-chief, which people would you actually like to bring in? Now this isn't for artists, because you said there's a lot of them out there, but I think a qualified and talented writer is really harder to find than an artist.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I'm not gonna, you know, Chuck Dixon. But Chuck's already writing everything under the sun, so he's, you know. But again, I would rather write myself than edit others.
Well, now, being editor-in-chief, you can still assign yourself a book.
Sure. And in fact, I am acting as editor-in-chief for Cautionary Comics, which is doing Off-Worlder. I just sent you a couple images on your Facebook page.
Let's see here. I'll have to go back and tweet them. Bear with me here for just a sec. So you're making a stable up. Can you pick 4 that you would want by your side?
Writers?
Yeah.
All right. Peter Brandvold. Chuck Dixon. James Artemis Owen. And James Hudnall.
Now, I'm not familiar with James Hudnall.
Well, he did The Private Life of Lex Luthor, and he did Espers. He did a lot of work for Malibu. Are you looking at your Facebook page?
I am pulling that. Yep. I have a computer that is evil and that may die. So it goes slow. Okay, there we go. Wow, that is beauty. Now, did he color it himself too?
Yeah. That's not the
Wow.
final coloring. The new version has more contrast between the off-worlder and the spaceship hovering over him.
Let me go ahead. And for those of you listening as well, I'm throwing these up in tweets. So there's your reference. And we do have some questions rolling in. So if you don't mind, can we go ahead and jump into those?
Yeah, I wish you would.
Okay. Now Kadant says that she's a writer too, and she's been finding herself blocked lately. Do you ever have a problem with being blocked, and what would your suggestion be to help that?
Well, Kadant, I would say that your job is a little bit like a bricklayer's. A bricklayer has to pick up a brick and keep setting it down. You can never run out of ideas. So, and I never do. Maybe 30 years ago I did, but I don't now, because a writer is an idea machine. I carry a notepad with me at all times. And if I see or hear something interesting, I write it down. Sometimes it's just a name. Sometimes it's just a name, but a name can inspire you. Or I'll see an interesting story in the news. Here's an example. There's cockroach milk. Yes, it's the next big thing. I'm not kidding. There are a bunch of people who have found that cockroach milk is even more traditional or even more nutritious than cow milk. And so they're theorizing that in the future, people will have cockroach farms to produce milk. And well, this was begging for a badger story. And so it's in my new badger story, which is called Fats. That's the one that we're gonna crowdfund. But that's just one example. Another example is just any concept that enters your mind. A lot of people worry about the Earth, what's going to happen, and that's inspired a novel like No Blade of Grass, which is what happens when things stop growing, and The Sheep Look Up by John Brunner, which is what happens when human population simply becomes overwhelming. And another premise is, well, what if gravity stopped working and everybody just started drifting away and the planets started drifting without any form or function? How long would life last? You can find ideas anywhere. You can find ideas, be inspired by true life characters. I often am. I was inspired by the Black Dahlia murder and a book in particular called Black Dahlia Avenger. To write a horror novel called Domain, which is about a haunted house. It combined a whole bunch of ideas in there, but that was the inspiration. So there's no excuse not to have ideas. You got to be thinking about it constantly. I know that I think about my stories constantly, and I'm always thinking about ideas.
I mean, I can't disagree. As a writer, you have to be an idea factory. And I run into a lot of people that are like, I just want to write horror. And it's like, you know what? Try to write outside of horror. Try to do a story that isn't horror based, because the more you stretch yourself in other genres, the better you're going to be when you come back to the genre that you really like. I personally have found this to be the case. I mean, I've written Harlequin romance stories, and there are some gimmicks in those that I'm like, oh yeah, this will transfer into what I actually really like to read and what I really like to write.
Mm-hmm.
Hey Man Nice Shot asks, what is the worst story and or character that you've worked on?
Oh, there are too many to mention, my friend. I would like to torch a whole bunch of comics that I wrote in the 80s and 90s, but I'm not going to tell you what they are. You're going to have to go through them all and choose which ones are the worst for yourself.
Now, as a follow-up, is there any character that if the big two set before you to say, write this, you would be like, no, I don't think so?
I really can't imagine that happening. As I said, it's the writer's job to imagine any point of view.
That's fair enough. Let's see here. Oh, that's a decent story, or that's a decent question, and I'll ask it as a two-parter. What's the shortest amount of time you've ever completed a work, and the longest? But let me subsection that. Let's go with a comic book story as compared to your novelizations.
Well, when I'm cooking, I can write over 10 pages a day. And that's really steaming. And the reason I can do that is because I'm excited about what I'm doing and I know I'm on the right path. It's when I don't know what happens next that the work slows down. So I'm pretty proud of that. Any story on which I wrote 10 pages a day is a good story.
Now, do you ever find, especially dialogue wise, do you ever find a character leading you, or we're writing it, but you know what I mean as far as a character writing itself?
All the time. And that's when you know you're on the right track.
I cannot disagree. I've had ones where I thought it was the shittiest story in the world, and then all of a sudden that character takes hold.
Yeah.
and the dialogue starts pumping out, and the actions that it's like, well, this is sensible to what the character's doing, to set the attitude. Let's see here. What do we got here from Jolly Rogers? Jolly Rogers Bilgewater is asking, at what time is it acceptable to lose hope for both DC and Marvel?
Oh, what's this guy's name? Sully?
Jolly Rogers Bilgewater.
Jolly. All right. Jolly, forget those. The beauty of the comic is that it only involves sweat equity. You need a writer, you need an artist. If you want to write, what you want to do is find an artist who wants to do comics but can't write. You want to do comics but you can't draw. You get together and you give it your best shot. That's the thing, though. Don't worry about Marvel or DC. If you put out a comic that kills, they'll read it because they understand comics and they're always looking for new talent. But also, don't spend your life hoping to be taken up by Marvel or DC. A lot of people have carved out very successful careers outside of Marvel and DC. Dave Sim, for one. You mentioned Dave Stevens, David Lapham, who does Stray Bullets. A number of people are doing outstanding work at Image, and they're making a living off of it. Go ahead.
And to kind of bring that around, now the submission process is, if you've got finished work, you can submit it to Image to see whether or not they want to publish it.
Well, they have guidelines. Do a search and just say Image submission guidelines, and they have a whole page of stuff that you need to present. It's a letter saying what you want to do and why, and then you have to outline each issue. And I believe they require 3 issues complete in hand before they will publish. I may be wrong about that. I'm sure that there's some big shots who'll come and say, I want to do this, and they'll say, oh yeah, go ahead. But for an unproven talent, you got to show them what you got. You got to make your shot count.
But do you think this is a good or a bad trend? Is it something that new creators? Now I know there's always some amount of desperation involved, but new and confident creators, do you think this is a good way to get into a stable?
Yeah.
Okay.
Put out your own comic. They'll read it.
Now, I don't know whether or not they don't have, if you do submissions, they don't claim rights on you in case you want to self-publish later, do they?
Oh, no. No, you own your stuff at Image. It's all creator owned.
Okay. Let's see here. And from the chat, what are your top 3 favorite pieces which you have worked on?
Well, Nexus, Badger, and some stuff I got coming up that's going to blow people's minds.
And I have the feeling that that you take more pride in your original creations, as you should, than any journeyman work.
Well, I'm very proud of a lot of work I did for other companies. I'm proud of my Punisher run. I'm proud of my Flash run. But yeah, you always love your own children the most.
Oh, sure. And of course, sometimes you run into those redheaded stepchildren.
Uh-huh. Like
Let's
Sonic
see here. You had mentioned your wife helped you with marketing before. Have you ever had any other outside help with marketing? And what avenues would you suggest for self-publishers if they don't have that kind of help?
Well, geez, you know, again, I'm the last guy in the world. I know nothing about it. I get about 5 letters a day saying, well, we're here to help you market, especially for the novels. Oh, you got a book up? We'll get you reviews. We'll get your book in front of 5,000 readers. I haven't done any of those. I may try it, but I have a feeling that it's just a racket for suckers because so many people want to write novels and do write novels and publish their own novels. And then they're sitting there with crates and crates of their own novels saying, well, how do I get people to read these? And how do you get people to read them? I don't know. You got to get reviews. You got to get mentioned. It's hard work.
And honestly, the only thing I can recommend that was helpful for me was getting a literary agent who actually gave a shit.
Well, yeah, I've never had an agent. Maybe I should.
It worked out with me for a time until I was like, I'm tired of writing these kind of stories. And they're like, oh, but it's your bread and butter. And I was like, yeah, I don't care. I just don't want to do them anymore. And, you know, we kind of split ways when that happened. But I mean, up until the point where I was doing everything that she wanted me to do, we were pretty cool. But, you know, I just kind of felt like I was cucked in my writing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Another question from the chat. Have you ever found that multiple works or ideas bleed into each other while you're writing?
Well, yeah, I have kind of a Mike Baron universe in which characters from one novel show up in the others. There are characters in the Bad Road Rising series that have appeared in my independent horror novels, like Scorpio, which is about a ghost that only appears under a blazing sun. I introduced a character in there who was an internet expert, and he was in jail for hacking the CIA. And now I'm bringing him back in Bad Road Rising because Josh lost his internet expert and needs a new one.
Well, it never hurts to bring back a character that you like, because at least you can write them with passion and it's not a fill in the blank character. Let's see here. Oh, well, we got a couple more. Anti-Hero Broadcast says, I've got a character who has grown with me over the years and now is basically a god. Without retconning, how does that character still be someone I can write and have him be relatable?
Well, I would say, first of all, what's your story about? And now you got to come up with a story. And as I said, I write my outlines to be just as entertaining as the story itself. And that's what you got to do. You got to write an outline that grabs people by the throat and outlines the whole story, the ups, the downs, and the ending. It doesn't have to be exact. You're going to change things when you're writing it. But people want to know what your story is about.
Yeah, I think, you know, you don't necessarily have to retcon somebody as long as you've got your story mapped out correctly. I mean, if they end up as a god and that's the end of everything, then you're going to be cool. But a lot of people in the writing exercise want to skip to the end. Yeah. Or like, I think it'd be more fun if I write the hero like this way. Like in the 70s when Superman was pushing planets, I'm like, you guys went just a little too far. And then they had to depower him, and then they rebooted him. And, you know, he almost got back to the exact same thing. It's not the case of everything old is new again. It's the case that you abandoned your through line. You abandon your plot. If you want to tell great stories, then you can't rely on you know, plot devices and you know, deus ex machina to be able to solve any situation that you get into. If you're going to write your hero into a corner, then you better also have figured out how to write them out of the corner without, plainly speaking, pulling something out of your ass. Mm-hmm. That's what I have trouble with a lot of the current modern day writers.
Yeah, well, that's why you outline.
Yeah, I won't disagree, even though I really should do more intensive outlines. I just don't. Maybe it's just giving the finger to Stephen King when he said you never write he said or she said.
Well,
And it's like,
he's
if you're having a dialogue, sometimes you gotta.
Listen. I only got a few more minutes, Jeffrey. So if there are any other questions, comments.
Oh, okay, yeah. Is there anything that's truly off limits in the world of comic fiction?
Well, I never put limits on a person's imagination, but I would say use common sense. And if you want your fiction to succeed, people have to like it, and that doesn't mean it has to be happy fiction, but it does mean that, for the most part, that good is rewarded and evil is punished. But I have read fiction about the most horrendous subjects imaginable, and one of them is The Devil of Nanking, about the rape of Nanking and its repercussions 30 years later in modern day Tokyo. It's a novel by Mo Hader, and I recommend it.
Now, this is nonfiction?
No, it's a novel.
Okay. And Kadant has one more follow-up. Have you ever had an artist go in a different direction of a character in mind, but you found their vision was more aesthetically pleasing than your initial vision?
Not really, because I try to leave it up to the artist what the character would look like. Every now and then I'll throw him an actor. Like I'll say, this guy should look like Matthew McConaughey. Well, he doesn't have to look like Matthew McConaughey, but they get the idea with that they want that he should look like a confident man in his 30s or 40s who's generally fit and ready to take on the world. Or you may say, you know, I want this character to resemble Lucy Liu. And, well, they're not going to draw Lucy Liu, but they're going to understand that you want an attractive, diminutive Asian woman. Or you say you want this character to look like Michael Moore. Well, he doesn't have to look like Michael Moore, but he does have to weigh 350 pounds.
Well, you know, I've often been confused for a diminutive Asian woman.
Me too.
But, you know, I take it in stride. Yeah. Now, I will make this as the last question from the chat. Anti-Hero Broadcast says, have you ever written something you thought was utter trash, but it turned out to be a fan favorite?
Yeah, people often tell me that they enjoy certain comics that I wish I had another chance at, and that's fine. I'm not going to say, well, that's a piece of shit. You know, I'm going to say thank you. I'm grateful to be able to make a living in this field.
Yeah, I think it falls in the quote that Steven Spielberg had. You know, movies are never finished; they're just abandoned.
I don't know about that.
I mean, you know, everybody's got a deadline.
Right.
And speaking of which, since we're at the bottom of the hour, let's go ahead. Make sure those of you who are watching. Click on Mike's links down there. He's got his official site, the Twitter, and the Facebook. But more importantly, go to Amazon right now. There are links to all 5 of the books. Yeah. He also has aren't there 2 actual self-published or crowdfunded? One is getting ready and the other one is finishing up, right?
Well, Cue Ball is crowdfunded. That'll be out this winter from Antarctica. It's a martial arts espionage thriller, and the art is explosive by Barry McLean. Off-Worlder is in the works. That'll be out sometime next year. I sent you some art. You can see that for yourself.
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful.
And I'm working on a new series about the James Bond of dogs. His name is Buddy McGill, with incredible art by Fur Calvi, and I'll send you some of that art later too.
Oh, that's great. I'll definitely post it up. Well, I tell you what, I do want to make sure that I give my thank yous. I've got my wrap up here. I'll bust through that really quickly, and then we'll go ahead and get the show closed out. Of course, coming up. For all of October, I'm not going to say it's spooktacular because everybody else has done that cliche. But coming up next week, we have B-movie director Jim Wynorski Now, if you don't know who Jim is, I definitely would suggest checking out some of his stuff. He actually was the writer-director of the 80s cult classic Chopping Mall. He also did the Munchie series, Munchie and Munchie Strikes Back, Deathstalker 2. He also did Return of the Swamp Thing, which I'll be honest with you, I thought he did a better job than Wes Craven. He's more popularly known for, and tis the season, for doing softcore TNA funny stuff, such as the Witches of Brestwick and the Bear Wench Project. So look forward to that happening. We are going to be visited by ghosts on the 16th. Justin Smith, the man who portrays Ghastly Ghost on Gulf City, will be showing up. We're going to be talking a lot about animation and, of course, the changes that are happening right now and his quest to get onto Cartoon Network. The 23rd, there's really not much you can say, but the Killing Joke is going to be here. The Don Rickles of the internet will be here, and we're just going to be sitting down, chilling, and having a discussion. There might be a few insults to the chat if you're lucky, but I think you're going to enjoy the look behind. And of course, for our Halloween show, we're rounding off October on the 30th with the creator of the Friday the 13th franchise, Sean Cunningham. And we're going to be talking to him not only about what it takes to create such an iconic horror series, but what it takes to actually be a man behind the scenes that gets projects done and brings things to your silver screen to enjoy. And so with that, I have to go back through the charts, people. And I'll be honest with you, the symptoms are incurable, but I don't think that they're detrimental. I think they're completely positive. And I know personally, I'll be looking forward to seeing future works by Mike Barron and whomever he decides to pick, whether as an artist or just doing the novels by themselves. I know I'm going to go pick them up. As now they are available in paperback, right?
Read my phrases, sing my praises. Yeah, they're all available in paperback.
Okay, because I got to have it in my hand. I just can't read it off a screen. I'm in love with books, so I want something that I can tuck in my back pocket and take with me after the nukes drop.
All right. Thank you, Jeffrey. I gotta go.
Well, I thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out this evening. Please join us next week for Jim Wynorski and, of course, for all my nurses. And, of course, for all of the audience who tunes in regularly. Big shout outs. And, well, I might do a ramble stream tonight. I don't know. If you guys think that you would like to hear a ramble stream, then I certainly will consider it. But for me, for the nursing staff, the doctor's office is closed.